If you have ever felt invisible in your own home, if you have ever wondered whether anyone truly sees you for who you are, then this story will touch your heart in ways you never expected. What happened to this forgotten dog will surprise you and remind you that sometimes the greatest transformations come when we least expect them. There was a dog named Charlie who lived in a small house on Maple Street. He was not the kind of dog that people would stop to admire on their morning walks. Charlie was a mixed breed with patches of brown and white fur that had seen better days. His ears were mismatched, one standing tall while the other flopped down, and his tail had a permanent bend from an old injury that never quite healed right. He was the kind of dog that blended into the background, unremarkable in every way that society seemed to value. Charlie had been with the Morrison family for 7 years, ever since he was a scraggly puppy that wandered into their backyard during a thunderstorm. Sarah Morrison had found him shivering under their old oak tree, his tiny body trembling with cold and fear. She had convinced her husband Tom to let them keep him, promising that Charlie would be no trouble at all. In those early days, Charlie had been the center of attention. The children, Emma and Jake, would play with him for hours, teaching him tricks and showering him with the kind of love that made his tail wag so hard his whole body would shake. But as the years passed, life had a way of shifting priorities. Emma grew into a teenager who spent more time on her phone than playing fetch. Jake discovered video games and friends at school who seemed more exciting than a loyal dog waiting by the door. Tom worked longer hours at the office, coming home tired and distracted. Sarah juggled her job at the local library with household duties, always rushing from one task to another. Charlie found himself spending more and more time alone in the backyard, watching life happen around him, but never quite being part of it. He had claimed a spot under the back porch where he could observe the family through the sliding glass door. From there, he could see them eating dinner together, laughing at something on television, or helping the children with homework. He would press his nose against the glass, hoping someone would notice him and invite him inside, but most of the time, they were too busy to see him there. During the day, Charlie would patrol the yard with the dedication of a security guard, barking at squirrels and mail carriers with the same enthusiasm he had always shown. He would bring sticks to the back door, dropping them hopefully on the mat, thinking that perhaps today would be the day someone would want to play. But the sticks would pile up, forgotten like so many of his gestures of love and devotion. The neighbors had their own lives and their own pets. Mrs. Henderson next door had a perfectly groomed poodle named Princess who won ribbons at dog shows. Across the street, the Johnsons had adopted a golden retriever puppy that drew crowds of admiring children every time they walked him. Charlie would watch from his spot in the yard, his heart aching with a loneliness that seemed to grow heavier with each passing day. He began to feel like he was disappearing, becoming more invisible with each sunrise. The family would step around him when he lay in the hallway, not out of cruelty but out of habit. He had become part of the furniture, a fixture so familiar that he barely registered in their daily awareness. When friends came over, they would ask about the dog, and the family would glance around as if suddenly remembering he existed before giving a casual response about how Charlie was fine, just getting older. Charlie stood up, shook the stiffness from his joints, and walked to the gate that separated the backyard from the front yard. The latch was old and loose, something Tom had been meaning to fix for months. With a combination of determination and desperation, Charlie managed to work the gate open and stepped into the world beyond his familiar prison. The sensation of walking down Maple Street was both terrifying and exhilarating. Charlie had not been beyond the confines of his yard in years, and the world seemed bigger and more complex than he remembered. Cars rushed past with purpose, people walked by with destinations in mind, and everything moved with an energy that made his heart race. He had no plan, no destination in mind. He simply walked, letting his feet carry him wherever they wanted to go. For the first time in years, Charlie felt alive. The wind carried scents that told stories of other dogs, other lives, other possibilities. He passed houses where he could hear the sounds of families eating breakfast, children laughing, lives being lived with the kind of fullness that he had forgotten existed. As the day wore on, Charlie found himself in parts of town he had never seen before. He walked through the downtown area, past shops and restaurants, through a park where children played on swings and slides. People glanced at him, some with concern, others with mild interest, but no one approached him. He was still invisible, but somehow, in this new context, the invisibility felt different. Felt like freedom. By evening, Charlie was exhausted and hungry. He had walked for hours, exploring every corner of his small town, and his paws were sore from the unfamiliar pavement. As darkness began to fall, he realized he was lost. The streets all looked the same, and he could not find his way back to Maple Street. For the first time since his escape, Charlie felt afraid. He found shelter under a bridge where other strays had apparently spent time before him. The ground was cold and damp, and Charlie curled up as tightly as he could, trying to conserve body heat. He thought about his warm bed in the Morrison house, about the reliable meals and the safety of his familiar yard. Despite all his feelings of invisibility, he realized that he missed his family desperately. Meanwhile, back on Maple Street, the Morrison family was beginning to notice that something was wrong. Sarah had come home from work and automatically filled Charlie's food bowl, as she had done thousands of times before. But when she looked outside, she could not see him in his usual spot under the porch. She called his name, expecting him to come running from wherever he had been napping, but there was no response. Tom joined the search, walking through the yard and calling Charlie's name with increasing urgency. Emma and Jake emerged from their rooms, suddenly focused on something other than their phones and games. They searched every corner of the property, checked under porches and behind sheds, but Charlie was nowhere to be found. It was Jake who discovered the open gate. The sight of that loose latch, something they had all walked past countless times without thinking, suddenly took on enormous significance. Charlie was gone, and they had no idea how long he had been missing or where he might have gone. The family spent the entire night searching. They drove through the neighborhood, calling Charlie's name out the car windows. They posted messages on social media, created flyers with his picture, and contacted the local animal shelters. Sarah cried as she realized how long it had been since she had really looked at Charlie, really seen him as more than just a background presence in their lives. "When was the last time any of us actually petted him?" Emma asked, her voice breaking with guilt. No one could remember. They had all assumed that someone else was giving Charlie the attention he needed, that somehow his needs were being met by someone other than themselves. Charlie spent 3 days and nights on the streets, growing weaker and more disoriented with each passing hour. He had found sources of water, but food was scarce, and he was not skilled at surviving on his own. Other stray dogs had tried to approach him, but Charlie was too frightened and confused to accept their companionship. On the third night, as Charlie huddled under his bridge, he heard a sound that made his heart leap. It was Sarah's voice, calling his name with a desperation he had never heard before. She was walking along the creek bank with a flashlight, searching every shadow and calling for him with tears in her voice. Charlie tried to stand, but his legs were shaky from hunger and exhaustion. He managed a weak bark, barely audible above the sound of the water flowing under the bridge. Sarah stopped and listened, then called his name again. This time, Charlie gathered all his remaining strength and barked louder. The beam of Sarah's flashlight found him, and she let out a cry of relief and joy that seemed to echo off the bridge walls. She scrambled down the bank, not caring about her clothes or the mud, and gathered Charlie into her arms. He was thin and dirty, his fur matted and his eyes dull with exhaustion, but he was alive. "Oh, Charlie," Sarah whispered, holding him close. "I am so sorry. I am so very sorry we let you down." The reunion at home was unlike anything Charlie had experienced since his puppyhood. Tom carried him into the house, and Emma and Jake surrounded him with gentle touches and soft words. They gave him small amounts of food and water, careful not to overwhelm his weakened system. Sarah made him a warm bed in the living room, right in the center of the family space where he could be part of everything that happened. But the real transformation began in the days that followed. The family had been shaken by the realization of how close they had come to losing Charlie, and more importantly, by the recognition of how invisible they had allowed him to become. They began to see him not as a burden or a background presence, but as a beloved family member who had been quietly suffering while they lived their busy lives. Emma started spending time with Charlie every day after school, brushing his fur and talking to him about her day. Jake rediscovered the joy of playing fetch and teaching Charlie new tricks. Tom made it a point to include Charlie in his evening routine, taking him for walks around the neighborhood and introducing him to neighbors who had never really noticed him before. Sarah began taking Charlie to work with her at the library, where he became a beloved fixture among the regular patrons. Elderly visitors would stop to pet him and share stories about their own dogs. Children would read to him during story time, and Charlie would listen with the patience and attention that only a dog can provide. The transformation was not just in how the family treated Charlie, but in how Charlie saw himself. He stood taller, his tail wagged more frequently, and his eyes regained the bright spark that had been missing for so long. He had learned that he was not invisible after all, that his presence mattered, that his love was valuable and needed. The neighbors began to notice the change too. Mrs. Henderson commented on how healthy and happy Charlie looked, and the Johnsons mentioned that their golden retriever puppy had been playing with Charlie through the fence. Charlie had become part of the community in a way he had never been before. Word of Charlie's story spread through the town, and he became something of a local celebrity. People would stop by the library specifically to see him, and his gentle nature and patient demeanor made him a favorite among visitors of all ages. The local newspaper even ran a feature story about him, with the headline, "The Invisible Dog Who Found His Voice." But the most profound change was in the Morrison family itself. Charlie's disappearance had forced them to confront their own patterns of taking each other for granted. They began to be more intentional about spending time together, more aware of each other's needs, more grateful for the love that surrounded them every day. Sarah would often find herself watching Charlie as he lay in his new favorite spot in the living room, and she would marvel at how much joy and peace he brought to their home. She realized that Charlie had always been offering this gift, but they had been too busy to receive it. His invisibility had been their blindness, not his failure. The experience taught them all about the power of attention, about how being truly seen can transform not just how others perceive us, but how we perceive ourselves. Charlie had not changed who he was during his time on the streets, but the family's ability to see him had been revolutionized by the fear of losing him. As months passed, Charlie's story became part of the family's mythology, a reminder of what really mattered and how easily it could be lost. Emma would tell her friends about the dog who had always been there, but whom they had failed to see. Jake learned to notice when people or pets in his life might be feeling overlooked. Tom and Sarah made changes in their work schedules to ensure that family time was protected and prioritized. Charlie himself seemed to understand the significance of his journey. He carried himself with a quiet dignity that spoke of someone who had been lost and found, who had experienced both invisibility and recognition, who had learned that love sometimes requires courage to claim. He was no longer content to wait in the shadows for attention, but he also did not demand it selfishly. He had found the balance between patience and advocacy, between loyalty and self-respect. The justice in Charlie's story was not the kind that comes from punishment or revenge, but the kind that comes from truth being revealed and love being recognized. Those who had overlooked him were not punished, but they were transformed by the recognition of what they had nearly lost. Charlie's vindication came not from proving others wrong, but from proving himself worthy of the love he had always deserved. On quiet evenings, when the family gathered in the living room, Charlie would lie in his spot and watch them with eyes that held both forgiveness and wisdom. He had learned that invisibility was not his natural state, that love was not something he had to earn through perfect behavior, and that sometimes the greatest gift we can give someone is simply to see them clearly. The story of Charlie's transformation spread beyond their small town, inspiring other families to look more closely at the love that surrounded them every day. Pet shelters reported increased adoptions from families who had been moved by his story. Children wrote letters to Charlie, thanking him for teaching them about kindness and attention. But for Charlie himself, the greatest reward was the simple knowledge that he was seen, that his presence mattered, that his love was received and valued. He had learned that invisibility was not a permanent condition, that it was possible to reclaim one's place in the world, and that sometimes the most profound changes come not from changing who we are, but from having the courage to show up fully as ourselves. Years later, when Charlie was old and gray, he would still greet each day with the quiet confidence of someone who knew he was loved. His story had become a testament to the power of persistence, the importance of being seen, and the transformative nature of love that is finally recognized and received. The invisible dog had found his voice, not by becoming louder or more demanding, but by having the courage to step out of the shadows and the patience to wait for eyes that were finally ready to see him. His legacy was not just his own transformation, but the transformation of everyone who learned to look more closely at the love that surrounded them every day. If this story touched your heart, if it reminded you to look more closely at the love in your own life, then Charlie's journey has served its purpose. Sometimes the greatest blessings come in the form of those who have been there all along, waiting patiently for us to have the wisdom to see them clearly. Share your own story of unexpected blessings, of love that was always there but needed to be recognized, of the invisible becoming visible through the power of attention and care.